watched like a Glaswegian Christmas film the other day, and it was really bizarre. It was like about a radio host who uncovers some conspiracy with all the ice cream truck drivers around the city.
Man, what kind of conspiracy?
Well, there was sort of, I think from memory, one of the ice cream. Oh, I don't know. I can't remember really. I can't really explain it. It'd probably take too long.
Sounds bizarre.
But it's good. I wish I could remember what the name of it was.
Is it an old film?
Maybe it's from the 90s. Maybe I think the title is like a part of a Christmas song or something.
I'm gonna look this up. This is intriguing.
Yeah, I wish I could remember what it was.
Do you ever go to a Christmas film? Do you have one you kind of find yourself continually coming back to?
Not really, but I think there's a lot of good films that are actually sort of Christmas films by proxy or something. You know, like the ones that sort of just have like a Christmas element to it that you just would say, oh, that one.
Like Die Hard?
Yeah, that's the one that usually people go to.
Or do you ever like any like Shane Black's films like The Nice Guys or Kiss Kiss Bang Bang or stuff like that? Kind of always tend to be set at Christmas.
I've seen the Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, I think, but no, not a lot. Haven't seen a lot of them.
Would you say are you a creature of habit?
I think I rather than habit, I think I feel like really quite aware of falling into habits, and so I try to change. Let's sort of move away from them if I do. But I think routine is something that that's what I try to employ.
Do you find it's easier to be creative when you have a routine that you can kind of exist within, a structure in that way?
I think it's just the nature of like getting up every morning to make music. By the nature of that job, there's sort of some structure is necessary, you know. Otherwise, probably just, I don't know, like spend too long on a certain idea or something.
Yeah. You can kind of get lost in it.
Yeah, there sort of needs to be a bit of harmony between sort of being free enough to follow any sort of random thought all the way to its conclusion, and also to just say, no, this has gone on for too long.
How are you then? Like, how are you listening to your intuition to know which ideas to kind of follow and which rabbit holes to go down, and how do you know when to kind of back away and it's not going somewhere?
I think because there are a few sort of versions of the idea. There's sort of the idea that sort of comes fully formed and, oh, I'm going to try this out. Then there is sort of experimentation, which is the sort of the dangerous part, but then also a kind of like a marriage of the two, where it's an idea fully formed, but then it's sort of you are experimenting at the same time, and then it takes its own. You kind of follow it away. I think stopping is not that I have a sort of formula for when I stop doing something, but definitely walking away from something is the best remedy for all of the above.
Is it quite a hard part of the process though as well? Kind of having to finally leave it and decide that that's it finished? Yeah,
definitely hard. But you sort of get better at it because, well, say for example, this year I've pretty much come into my studio here, well, basically 6 days a week from about 8 or 9 to 4 or 5 or 6 kind of. And so I know that I'm coming in tomorrow, so I can just walk away and leave something. And I think I tend to, the afternoon when you sort of start to feel tired, coming back in the morning with fresh perspective, things generally sound better than they did in the afternoon anyway.
Are you most creative in the morning? Is that when you kind of have that burst of energy? Or
I think, yeah, at the moment, definitely. But if I do have an idea for something in the evening, it's as simple as just writing it down and coming in and, using the tools to try to execute it.
What do you do on the 7th day? If you're in that studio 6 days a week, what does the 7th entail?
Just the other parts of life, I think. Sort of it's nice to really leave everything here and just go and not even really do anything to do with music. Chores and things like that. Be outside, enjoy the sun, read books, that sort of thing.
Is it easier to balance life and music now that you're doing it full time? Because it's obviously quite an obsession. Is it easier to find that balance?
Yeah.
It's happy.
I think it's just like, it's not so much that it's because it's a full-time job. It's more that I've just learned that I need to do that. I think I always really sort of fetishized the sort of artist who is 24/7 and needs to just can just work on anything at any time and middle of the night get up and do something. And I just realized I know my limitations, and I know that this kind of way that I work here is how I work best. And also that some weeks I just can't. It's as basic as I can't really come up with any ideas, or I just feel like I've been lobotomized or something. It's just wrung dry.
Do you have to step away when that happens?
I try to. I think sometimes I just then go and read books or do kind of more mundane things like clean up.
At what point did you move away from that idea of the artist who's working on things 24/7 and come into that structure of routine and a kind of daily working pattern?
Because I don't think I ever really did do it like that. I think when I realized that, I don't need to have that sort of access. I don't need to allow myself that access. I can just really shut off and it's going to be okay. I probably realized that, I don't know, just this year has been big for those sorts of realizations, realizing that you're sort of not always running out of time, and the sort of pressures that are put on for all this kind of stuff is just been put on by me. So I can just slow down a bit.
What sorts of other revelations have you came to this year?
Well, I don't know. A lot of the other revelations in this studio have just been sort of on more of a technical level, just interesting ways to record things and getting practiced at that, I suppose. But I don't know. I think it's just there's just been just watched a lot of good movies and read a lot of good books this year.
Are you we kind of started off there speaking about patterns and habits. When was the last time that you noticed a pattern or a habit in your music or your creativity, and then kind of went about rectifying it and moving away from it?
That's a good question. There's like a sort of a whole album worth of songs which are sort of, they have their sound that I've finished, and I think basically I used the sort of habits or the patterns in like amongst those songs, or that when I sort of thought, maybe I'll have this be what gives them all a familiarity to one another. After I've sort of finished that, I decided to just sort of try to change it up, go against the grain, for the next batch. So much of what I do is in my own head that it's kind of hard. I find it hard to put into words sometimes. Since I've also been working with other people a little bit this year, I'm trying to sort of say things more out loud, and sort of that's when the realizations are more happening about the process kind of thing.
I guess it's difficult as well because does the music become the way that you communicate? And you communicate your idea? Is it easier to communicate your ideas by just doing them in music as opposed to trying to vocalize them in terms of, speech?
I think when people ask me these questions, or when I get interviewed, I try too hard to answer it in this way that the real answer is obscured sometimes. But it is easy, but also to talk about. No, it's easy to, like, I can explain what I mean or what my intentions are with the music, but it's sort of, there's a few different aspects to it.
I guess it's left open as well, though. Although you can explain, your intentions behind it, you don't really have any way of knowing the impact that it's going to have upon the individual who's listening to it. And there's that space that's kind of left in it for them to impart their own meaning and experiences into it.
Yeah, totally. And I think the feel in the music part is huge for, when I make my decisions and why I make my decisions. It's like kind of instinctual, so that's what kind of makes it hard to talk about in a few ways. But then there's all the sort of other little bits and pieces.
Kind of following your heart as opposed to your head. Kind of just going with your gut.
Yeah, I mean, I think the songs always know kind of what they want to be. And if they don't get there, then I think that's when you got to sort of move on. Every little song idea always starts out with so much potential, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get there. I think that's maybe the exciting part for me, is to try to see if you can take this little thing with so much potential energy and just turn it actually into something finished.
Can that be upsetting though as well, if it feels like a song doesn't reach its full potential? Like if you have an idea that you're really excited about, but for whatever reason you just can't get it to that final spot where it can soar.
I think it takes practice getting over those feelings, or just, some of these songs this year, I think I've I'm onto my fourth full go at them, kind of. The core of the song is all the same, but they sound completely different. I don't know. I think it's worth it. It's been worth it in the past, and if you don't spend too long on it, I mean, there's always things you sort of figure out on the way anyway, so it's never completely wasted time.
I mean, the way you're approaching it, though, must be quite different as well by the time you're on that fourth run at it. How does that kind of mindset feed into the creativity and the songwriting itself and the way that you kind of work on
I
it?
think it's like sometimes I just circle back around and it ends up being what it was in the beginning, sort of is the best, sort of try to recapture that. The sort of, I guess, sometimes overworking things, it sort of makes it all sound a bit complicated and it's real cerebral to listen to, but then really an empty, rough kind of thing is maybe what's needed.
Do you ever feel yourself overthinking things and then kind of draw back, or?
Yeah, all the time. All the time, because it's hard not to feel like you have to prove yourself as a musician or prove that you sort of like make things complicated or make it interesting for people, just which is, I suppose, a sort of imposter syndrome thing.
Do those feelings get any easier after 3 records, though? Because I mean, when you put out 3 albums, and kind of grown as an artist in terms of both size and in soundscape over those 3 albums, does it then become easier to, you kind of have proved yourself?
Yeah.
Or do you feel that way on a personal level, or does it still not feel like to you that you've managed to hit that kind of level of contentness?
I think it's just when I have clarity about it all, it's sort of it's the driving force is more inside of me. So I just am, if I'm not satisfied with, like, I think I've been really happy with all the records, but it's just I'm not satisfied that I've done as much as I could do, or sort of there's always, I want to make another thing that does something else that kind of captures me in a certain way. I don't really feel like I've proved myself to myself. And also I'm interested in complicated things and seeing how far you can push compositional things and sound things. But then if there's no song inside of the flesh of the song of what you've made, then it's, I don't know. I think it's need to dial that back a bit.
Do you think you'll ever feel like you've proved yourself to yourself? Will that be the thing that maybe constantly keeps fueling you and keeping you going?
Probably. I hope so. I enjoy doing all of this. It's really quite fun. So I think I don't really know what the answer to that is. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you're conscious of within yourself that you feel like's fueling you in the same way that kind of that motivation to prove yourself is too, maybe?
There's definitely just like a kind of high that you get from making a good song, or a moment in, when things come together that is worth chasing after. That's a big driving force. And then also just ideas for songs and things just come relatively often, so that's a motivator. And also whenever I hear other people's music and help people with their music, or just listening to records and things like that, that also makes me want to go and make some music too.
Do you remember the first time you felt that high, of completing a song and you were really happy with it, that you mentioned there at the start?
I think the one that I'm talking about here is like the first time I remember is when I first started recording things on my own. You start layering things up together. I just had like a 4-track tape machine that I was just working out how to use, and yeah, when things clicked, or when that's when it would have been.
Do you still record to tape now?
No, no.
When did that switch occur?
When the tape machine died, it died, and then I switched over to. I bought a digital Porter Studio, because the tape cassette deck thing was a Tascam Porter Studio thing. And then, yeah, I just got another little Porter Studio with faders, digital, recorded to that, burned it onto CD. Then I made the jump to putting things in the computer.
You still have any of the old kind of analog gear?
That stuff. There's one of them, Tom, the bass, one of the band members from Methyl Ethel. He has the digital one, I think. And it's got some old weird stuff on it, which is a bit of a trip down memory lane.
Do you keep a hold of everything?
Not really. More so these days. I used to just sell things to buy something else, but
I was meaning more the songs. Like you said, it's a trip down memory lane.
The songs? Well, most things, there's always a little piece of something everywhere. They get dug up every now and then, and it's handy too because I just sort of sometimes I resample my own things that I've recorded as well.
That's interesting. Do you still have like a memory and a feeling attached to the initial recording then when you sample it and you bring it into the song? Is it kind of combining two emotions, like the modern day experience of working with it and the feeling you had back at that time when you made it initially?
I think when it's made into something else, the feeling changes or goes away. But there is definitely an emotion attached to listening to those old original demos and things. It's very much. I always remember the place exactly where I was when I was recording that.
In terms of like location wise or headspace?
Location wise, as it's turned out, I've kind of recorded all this stuff all over the place.
Does that make you quite conscious of where you kind of position your studio then? If the memories become quite attached to the location in that place, is the environment, is that quite an important thing for you and where you make your music?
Not really, but I am proud that I've just recorded bits and pieces of things sort of everywhere in every kind of situation. That I haven't been too precious over where I have to be or anything. Just kind of being thrifty with time and things like that is something I've always tried to be.
In terms of just getting the most out of like a day?
Yeah, or when we used to be on tour every now and then, just sort of making the most of the spare time that you have and just throwing something in there, trying it out.
Exploring a city as well? Or
Yeah, definitely. Exploring is very important.
what sort of a role does, traveling and exploring play in inspiration for the kind of creativity and the music you're working on?
Yeah, I was going to say that's huge. I think there's something about physically moving around that gives kind of like sort of lends itself to a clarity that sort of feel like it opens me up to just have ideas land.
Can you get a different sense of clarity when you're in the one location?
Maybe it's the routine part of the day that lends itself to the same experience when I'm in one location. So say like when I catch the train here and the bus, those sorts of things, it's just this sort of commute time that gives a bit of brain space. But sometimes the studio or the sitting down to work or picking up the pen, that's the most intimidating part of the whole process. Like that's what's causing the writer's block.
Yeah, there's nothing more intimidating than a blank page.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you have a physical studio space that you go to?
Yes, yeah, which is where I am right now.
Nice. Has that always been that way, or did you ever start off in like a kind of a home setup?
Yeah, home setup, and then sort of as the years have rolled by, I've worked towards, I guess, more of a space. But this space here is an old friend of mine's studio that he set up years and years ago. I essentially started recording in this very room, the earliest things for the Methyl stuff, on that tape machine. So it's kind of serendipitous to be back here in the same room, but with a lot more equipment, the songs sounding a lot more hi-fi.
Did you notice it have an impact on your songwriting when you first moved into that space and you had a physical place that you had to go to?
I didn't really notice, but having a sort of a 9 to 5 approach to it and coming in on the train that's probably had the biggest impact on it all. It's just going into work, and some stability this year sort of hasn't been cut up with touring or anything like that, so it's just been pretty much straight down the line.
Is this the first time in a few years that you've been in like the one location and you've not been, jetting off touring?
I think it feels like that. It probably isn't, but when live shows roll around, it sort of can eat up a lot of time. So it feels like this has been the most amount of time I've just been able to be a kind of producer for.
Are you quite conscious of trying to find a way to channel that live experience into the creativity then? With what you were saying earlier, about how you're quite conscious of trying to be efficient with time and work everything in.
I think just when it comes to the live, because I keep them, I don't think about the live band and the records as the same thing. It's more like when I have to think about making a live show, then it's sort of solving a different kind of problem. So it's just have to change gear completely, almost like shut down one side and like open the other.
Yeah, just compartmentalize it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you do that in your creativity as well? Like in the actual individual parts of the process that you're working on, do you have to like lock them into different places in your mind to work on it?
I'd like to say that I was able to do that, but I think it's all kind of, there's a lot of cross chatter between it all.
It just kind of melds into the one flowing thing.
A little bit. A little bit.
What instrument do you primarily find yourself writing on these days?
Well, up until about a couple of weeks ago, it was the just piano, but the old guitar has made a reappearance, and it's been really good. I think what I've noticed is that I write kind of completely differently on both of them, and they sort of balance each other out. One, when I'm at the piano, it's sort of, I think about the composition of the song more deeply. And when I'm playing guitar, it's more lucid. I sort of just play and can kind of follow my instincts more. Yeah, it's nice to jump between the two.
Sounds like they're both tapping into quite different sides of your creativity.
I guess so, but both important sides. And I think I've always found easier to come up with good and new interesting ideas when I'm working in on something that's more technical. So say I'm, chopping something up, or working out a part on piano, or just like sitting and composing like all the harmonic structure for it. That's sort of, there's this a little bit of a element of play there that's really helpful for me to just then like follow an idea.
I think it was maybe Brian Eno who was speaking about that and saying that's what music really is, though, for adults, isn't it? Though it's play.
Totally, yeah.
It's like when you're young and you're creating, you're kind of encouraged to play, but then when you get older, we kind of seem to stop doing that, and music is one of the ways in which we can continue to and kind of tap into that side of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think it's been good to realize lately, is that that's kind of slowly what I think, the more that I've worked on music and learned new things, the more I've sort of, you lose that element of play, and you start to overthink things. And when record labels and numbers and things like that get involved, you sort of really start to overthink it in that way and lose the element of play. And to try to reintroduce that has been really helpful for me this year, and also to the borders finally opened to the eastern states over here in Australia. So a few of my friends slash bandmates in town. So to get together with people and just play some music, or at least come up with things together, ideas together, is definitely reintroduces that playful aspect.
Were you quite separated over the lockdown? Because it's really, you had quite a harsh, kind of strict, full-on 5-month thing where everyone was kind of kept in their
Yeah,
individual places. Yeah.
our border here in Western Australia is like pretty. There's a 14-day quarantine or something if you come in, so it's pretty hard. Yeah, and for some struggling musicians, it's a bit expensive as well.
When was the last time you left?
Probably March or Feb this year, but only over to Melbourne. Yeah.
You're, what we're speaking there about that idea and that element of play. Are you still you're quite well versed in your music theory, right?
I try to be. I'm sort of a like a flunky from high school who's just realized that I should have paid more attention, and then paid more attention.
I think it's easier sometimes though to come to it on your own as well. Like when you're out of that structure of high school, which can be a bit suffocating, you can kind of just learn when you want to.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes kind of more sense when I have an instrument in front of me, or I guess the things that I learned that I taught myself after school, kind of then it was time to learn some more theory. I always try to kind of learn at least a fair amount about something before I try to tackle it.
Just in life in general, like when you're kind of approaching any task, you tend to try and get an
Yeah,
idea of it, yeah.
I'm pretty much a read the manual kind of person.
Does that then though cultivate an environment in which something like the kind of fluidity of play can occur? If you kind of put in this work prior to it and build this atmosphere where you feel confident, and can you then kind of relax as a result of that and just do what feels natural?
Definitely, because I think you have to be aware in everything that just because it's written down on the page doesn't mean it's gospel. And so even though that is the manual, there are certain things that I guess you have to discern that yourself, but certain things that you can disobey, Definitely when it comes to the voltage and how not to electrocute yourself, they're things to obey, but there's kind of just the framework that is all there. So yeah, it's just learn how to do it and then try to do it differently sometimes.
Can it ease the sense of self-doubt as well? When you've got a little bit of confidence and you know that you know what you're talking about and what you're playing with.
That's probably got something to do with it. Maybe there is something stronger in knowing how something works, so that then you can use it to how you want to use it. Make it sort of fit fit it into how you want to do things.
Yeah, kind of entwine it with your own personality. Put your own stamp on it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's something that's interesting to think about as well when it comes to the new EP, because every song on that has its own kind of very distinct personality. Did you have quite a lot to choose from when you were working? Because they come from like songs that didn't quite make it onto the last record, right?
It kind of was its own little. They were all made at the same time, but that EP just sort of they fit together more than the others, and I suppose they were written to be together in the end, worked on to be together. So it's not like they're offcuts, but they are, their own sort of thing. I guess they are pretty. There's a bit of disparity between them all, but something that I'm kind of aware of that I find it hard to do the same thing twice, even if the thing that I just did was really good, and I can say that this was a great way of doing something, but then I want to kind of move off in another direction. And maybe it's got to do with the fact that I enjoy so much different kind of music.
Possibly as well because the excitement which made it, because when you're initially doing it the first time, you're kind of discovering it a little bit, and the excitement which maybe factors into it being so good then isn't present when you go back to it a second time, because you're kind of coming at it from a point of view where you already know what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as well because I'm sort of untethered. There's no one to stop me from going in any one direction, so I can really take it all the way there.
Very free.
Very free. So I guess it's the sound of freedom. But I'm also getting better and trying to. I acknowledge that cohesion in a body of music is an important thing, or can be an important thing. Sort of tying things together in one way or another is, I don't know. It's been kind of exciting to do.
To an extent, I mean, like your last record, every song on that is its own very distinct thing, and no two songs sound the same, but they're kind of unified by that. I guess they kind of surround the keys on that, or the synths rather, on that last album. But they're all kind of driven by that to a certain degree, but then the songs themselves take on different forms.
Yeah, I guess there's a few ways of doing it. Growing up listening to sort of those epic kind of proggy kind of records, like the Pink Floyds and that sort of thing. It was enjoyable to listen to bodies of music that kind of have that through line, or at least seem to be move like an opera or like a large symphony or something like that, where there is motifs, and it's where everything has been thought out, but at the same time it kind of is a bit grandiose to put that blueprint on like a pop record.
You can hear it in your choruses a lot, though. They're kind of big, sweeping. They tend to be the kind of more, I guess, the verses are quite intrinsically tied to your personality, and then the choruses take on a slightly more. They usually have quite a simple expression at the heart of them, don't they? And they're kind of allowed to soar in that way. Kind of gives them that anthemic edge.
Perhaps that's a habit as well. Perhaps like a big chorus and something that's relatable is like one of the habitual things that I fall into when I'm writing things. But finding a confident voice and like knowing what you want to say and saying what you want to say is sort of the hardest thing in making music.
Has what you want to say with your music changed over time?
Definitely. The way that I'm saying it as of this time round, it's been hard work, but I think that's part of it. Writing, rewriting, and just trying to balance, like find that in between where it feels natural to say something, but it's said with purpose.
Have you ever written a song as well, then, the initial idea that sparks it? What we're saying there about the idea of it kind of changing. Have you ever written a song with the initial idea that sparks it is then no longer present in the final version, and it kind of changes completely over the course of like working at it?
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes along the way, the initial ideas just become the worst part about the song, and then they get overtaken. But I think when things get removed, it's more that something just naturally happens, or some part will just come. Especially if it's like a melody or something, and it goes straight in and it happens really quickly. But I mean, I think the thing is as well, it doesn't matter to me that much. I think when I realize that, I stop being precious about the idea, the first thing, or the thing that's in there having to stay there. Once I realized that anything's possible, and to just don't be afraid to just delete things and just move completely on and just find the new, try to make it better, then it's sort of that openness lends itself to not being stuck, which is really helpful. And also because it always can be better, and if you fuck it up, it doesn't matter. Just you have to sort of screw it up and put it in the bin and start again. And I think that's a really good thing.
It sounds like there's a real excitement that comes from removing something from a track as well. Can it add like a sense of momentum to the process? Is it quite liberating to take something out and delete it?
Yeah, and it sort of comes. I've got into the habit now of it just happens so naturally. So if you could physically represent the sort of cuttings for all the projects that I've worked on, I'm sure my floor would be littered with it every day. But I just am doing it so often that I don't notice that I'm cutting things out all the time. And also that is the real objective for me in setting up a studio. It is routing and getting everything so that I can work really quickly, because I do work really really quickly. And so because I can pull a sound with speed and at ease, and sounds that I will pretty much keep, then it's fine to cut things out because I can always do it again. And I'm not worried about my memory either. And also I think there was like a anecdote that I think it was Paul McCartney or something talking about how him and John would write together, and if they couldn't remember the chorus the next day or what they were working on, then it wasn't sort of worth it. And in a way, it's kind of the same approach. If you can't just make it again, because it's not really the sound that holds the magic. It's more than that. It's like something you can hum more. That's the magic is in what is in the memory, I suppose.
Yeah, and the specific emotion which comes from such.
Yes. Yep.
It's interesting you mentioned how quickly you work, and the way that cutting stuff out can kind of add into that process when you're moving through something. Do you work faster? Has the momentum of your workflow changed? Do you work faster than you used to, or do you work slower, or has that changed and evolved in any way with time as you've developed as a songwriter?
I think I slow down purposefully. So I make sure that I do take time and I step away from things. I'm recording things in a more complex way, and in ways that will save. I have the whole song more in mind when I actually commit things to tape or like record them. So, and that is that. So as that's been added to the process, I've also sped up again. So I'm still kind of maintaining that equilibrium. It's recording music is really interesting. That if you're smart about it, you make sacrifices along the way, and you record something, and it might sound on its own not that great or not as good as it could be, but it'll just sort of fit into the mix exactly where you need it to be. Kind of like those people who build those stone walls all around, the Scottish Highlands, the ones that are all just stacked up on top of one another.
Yeah.
And they sort of, the people who make those, they sort of smash those rocks up perfectly, and it just put it straight in there. That's kind of what my process is like.
Are you able to? Do you keep the full song like in your mind as well when you're working on it? If you're working on a specific point in the track, are you still able to kind of have the whole thing playing out at the back of your mind? Are you able to kind of view it as where it kind of sits in the whole?
When I'm in that sort of like maverick zone, that's when I sort of come up with the most pure ideas. I was like, sometimes I will be away from the song and I'll sort of hear an idea, or I can listen to the song, like a bounce of the song, when I'm driving or something like that, or walking or running, and I'll know exactly what I want to put into it. But I think I'm more aware, no, maybe because I'm trying to come up with things all the time, that I've noticed that I can't always come up with ideas, and sometimes I'm empty, like I said earlier.
It's interesting what you're saying there about, you'll take them in the car, or you'll go for a run, or you'll go for a walk with them. Does that tie into what we were speaking about earlier in any way, with where you're on tour and you're moving, and you kind of get a different sense of clarity? Is that a similar thing? Are you tapping into something else when you take it into a zone where you're moving with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Even just closing, I think we forget so often to just like close our eyes and listen when you've got a screen in front of you with all of the bright colors, and there's something about shifting your focus or what you can see or all of that that just helps you sort of listen a bit more deeply, perhaps. But also, I kind of stopped taking things out of the studio. I used to bounce things out all the time and listen to them a lot, but I also sort of become too familiar with certain versions of things, and you sort of maybe start to grow too attached to the little ideas and bits of songs, and stop like asking yourself if it can be better. Yeah, I don't know. There's just like a lot of balancing to be done, especially when you are the one putting the deadlines on, and you're the one who says when it's finished.
Yeah, I mean, songwriting itself is a balancing act. It's about making sure that everything's kind of resting in a perfect balance, so that it can function and convey the emotion or the memory that you want it to in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I'm true to myself, I realize that I should finish songs in a certain time, and what I couldn't achieve with that song, try with another one. That's probably the best approach for me.
Just kind of have a fresh hit at it.
Not even at that song, just write a new song and sort of let myself repeat some ideas, which is it's hard for me to do, but I should, maybe the best approach would be to write a song a bunch of different times, and perhaps by the third or fourth time you might have ironed out all those problems. But actually, that if you want to talk about process, that's sort of something that I've started doing more now. Is really writing the song outside of the box, out of the computer, out of the sort of studio zone, trying to nail down on as much of it as I can before recording anything. And that's been really helpful. Like write drafts of lyrics and all that sort of stuff. I used to just sort of make it as I go along, but sometimes you end up with a really good verse, or bits and pieces, or like a few interesting ideas that then you try to reverse engineer a song into, and it's sort of hasn't worked so well for me.
It's interesting that the hypothetical idea that you mentioned, though, of trying to write a song, multiple times, and kind of just almost to refine it a little bit more each time. Do you almost write a song multiple times in the process of crafting one song? Like if you change it a lot and you're working through it a lot, do you almost do that with the one song?
I guess so, but the core element, the sort of that sort of soundbite that's in your head of the song is always the same. If I was to name any kind of song to you, you'd flash like a part of it, or this thing in your brain, whether it's like, I don't know, all those memories and things. So it's always that one that I'm working on.
Do you still have that even after the song's finished? Like if I were to mention one of your songs to you, would you flash back to a specific point of it?
Yeah. And maybe that's why I like some more than others, because it was just about how I was feeling when this sort of memory burned in. Like there's a song called What About the 37 Degrees? And I just remember listening to it when I don't know, got to a certain stage where the song was completed, or, I can't remember what it was. But I would just listen to that and just walk down the hallway of my house that I was living in. And that's what I can remember, just feeling. Sometimes when I'm feeling really good and listening to my music, I just dance a lot. And it's kind of a really good feeling. And I know how this all sounds like it's sort of like getting off to your own, brand, but I don't know. It's a good feeling.
Movement can be a good indicator, though. But because it's such a subconscious thing, it's almost like you're taking yourself out of it, and you know that if you're able to dance to it, other people probably will be as well. Because you can't really control that. It's more of it's an innate thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's sort of that's exactly why I do this, because all what I chase is those sort of moments, and the rest of it is all just kind of secondary.
We've spoken a little bit in the last few minutes about repetition as well, in terms of the process and kind of getting to the heart of a song. In a more literal sense, repetition obviously plays a role in your music. When you repeat a phrase continually in a song, like you do in Uber would be the primary example, of something like Hip Horror or Ruiner even. When you do that, does that change the meaning of the phrase for you?
I don't think it changes. I don't think the meaning of the phrase changes for me, but I know that is definitely an idea. I think more about, with repetition, the trance side of things. And that kind of is more of a sort of an approach with when I'm making the music, that it can be both balancing, like it can balance you and unbalance you at the same time, which I find really, really interesting. And also that's sort of what music is for us human beings. I really think that the sort of heartbeat rhythm of everything that's the innate thing. That's the thing that you can't switch off. It doesn't exist as much in Western classical music. It's more in sort of more ancient or like older musics. It's almost like Western classical music. We started overthinking everything, and that's where all the good harmony and the other sort of feels. Yeah, that's where they all sort of exist. But yeah, really the repetition comes, I think, from just that sort of throbbing heartbeat like rhythm.
Yeah, it's almost like a state of hypnosis.
Totally. And it's sort of very addictive. That's why I love kind of chopping things up and like sampling things, but just hearing it repeat and make. That's, I think, some of the most the like that's the most shortcut way to come up with an interesting idea, is to just kind of grab something, chop a tiny piece of it, and loop it, you know, for ages. And it's like the song just manifests in front of you.
Is that the same when you're taking like samples from like a real world environment and kind of chopping them up and using them like an instrument?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard. It's hard to find the same satisfaction with just straight up synthesizers once you've explored how interesting like a sample can sound, and you just can't dial that in as easily. So it's almost, I think of kind of the synthesizers and instruments around me as ways to. It's like that's the real, the sort of heavy brushstrokes, the sort of painting in the background, and then all the detail is in, all the interesting detail, the things that really make the painting are all the sample bits and all the little extra spice.
When you use those samples in the way that you do as well, do you initially write it on the instrument that they're kind of filling in for and then layer them on top of it and then take the instrument out, or do you write from scratch with the sample when you're chopping it
These
up?
days, to avoid kind of like becoming, well, to avoid sort of things all sounding like Panda Bear or Animal Collective, I don't really use samples straight away. I just write a song. I get a bit bored with it when it's all just there as it should be, and so then it's time to, then that's when the real trying to find something unique that'll fit and elevate the song into being something entirely of its own. That's when the sampling and really trying to think in an oblique way about things, when that comes in.
Are you always with field recorder then? Like, I'm trying to work out what is it that actually draws you to that specific sample to fill in for that sound? Like, why is it you come to that? What is it you're looking for in the sample and the sound? Is it something to do with the rhythm and the flow of it, or is it more about how it feels to you and the texture of it? Or
It's all of the above. It's because I am excited by it for starters, and also it's just, I want to give the song its own sonic world, its own landscape, and I think for me, a way to do that, a way that excites me, a way that makes me hear things that I've never heard before, is often through sampling, or at least like processing things in my own way. Because I like to. Otherwise, sometimes the songs start off, or just sound like a regular, everyday cookie cutter song.
were the samples you were using? So that EP was recorded in London, but were the samples you using, were they recorded in London or were they recorded in Australia or somewhere else?
The field recordings and bits and pieces that I use to make stuff is just sort of all over the place. It's just with my phone and things like that. But lately, it's sort of just a way of processing and putting things in. But it's not it's not sort of sampling in a way that's as like traditional. It's kind of trying to just find something that's, I don't know, interests my ears. I just think it's more. It's sometimes it just is more exciting for me to try to. It's like more challenging than for different parts, or like come out with like a nice like hook or something. it's more challenging for me to try to find a sound or like manipulate something to do that job than it is to just play a guitar line. But perhaps I'm just not very good at coming up with cool guitar leads or anything.
I guess the reason we call it sampling is because it's the same kind of intent where you take a sound that we know and you do something completely different with it and using it in a way that we haven't heard before.
Yeah, I guess it's exactly that.
So that's what spectral synthesis is, right? Is that
I guess
the kind of intent of that? Yeah.
The way that I use it. And then there's also just using actual samples and just chopping and screwing them up and things like that in the more rhythmic ways. But all of the above I find to be super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's partly what gives your music in this EP, although it's got, its roots in the music of the past. I know you've spoken about how The Cure was such a big influence on the last record. It's kind of what allows it to keep feeling like forward-facing, if you know what I mean. Like, it's what it allows it to sound futuristic whilst also being slightly nostalgic.
Yeah, that's I like to hear that. I mean, some of probably the most interesting new music is made by, in my opinion, are producers and people who are really pushing the boundaries of like of that kind of thing, like the spectral synthesis and just like music made primarily on laptops and things like that. That it does sound like the future, or at least sounds like now to me.
Do you think the future of music at large will sound retro or futuristic?
I think it will aspire to be both of those, but it'll always just sound like the time that it was made, with the tools that it was made. I just think people aspire to do, one or the other. It's rare that people say, I want things to sound like right now, because I guess every time you try to sound like right now, it's, the time passes and it's already then.
As is the ephemeral, way that music is. It's constantly moving, changing.
Yeah. But I think the sort of access that everyone has to the means of production, the tools of Logic and things like that everybody uses, and the quality of sounds that people are making with these products, and I don't know, it is both going to mean that more people can make music, there's more chance people will make interesting music, but on one hand, everything will maybe sound a bit more homogenous, but I guess that will just force the more abstract minds to come up with something fresh.